Hi everyone, my name is Tina Aswani Omprakash, and I've been living with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, otherwise known as SIBO, since 2015. I've had, for a number of years now, a number of digestive ailments. This has really been a family affair for me. You'll see a photo to the right of my father and me. My father was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. He passed away from colorectal cancer when I was 8 years old and when he was 39. He lived with IBS as well, and may have had other functional GI disorders, but the IBD really took prevalence in his case as well as the cancer. For me, was diagnosed with chronic constipation just in the last few years, so IBS-C. But all my life, I can remember having issues with chronic constipation. Since childhood, I used to complain to my mom, who you'll see to the right as well. You know, mom, like I can't go to the bathroom, and I would have to have laxatives and enemas and all sorts of things just to go to the bathroom. After my father died, we didn't have health insurance, and we really struggled with, making sure that I was getting the pediatric care that I needed. So I wasn't diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome for many, many years. And honestly, when I finally was diagnosed with a digestive disease, it was inflammatory bowel disease. And that was when I was 22 and finally had health insurance. But even before that, I had all sorts of extraintestinal manifestations of my inflammatory bowel disease, and I had all sorts of IBS, constipation related symptoms, as well as GERD, acid reflux in my teenage years. My own IBD diagnosis trumped any need to explore other functional GI disorders, so the IBS went ignored. Any other issues around constipation and incomplete evacuation went ignored for many years because my Crohn's disease really was the bigger beast, so to speak. I had many, many surgeries over the course of a 7 year period from age 24 to age 31. I had over 20 surgeries, and I was dealing with a lot of psychosocial issues around having the Crohn's, including this being labeled a diet disease, and a lot of the cultural stigmas in the South Asian community around using medication, having surgery, living with an ostomy were sort of the bigger concerns at that time. But what I didn't realize is what a toll functional GI disorders can take during this time. So when did my SIBO diagnosis happen? It happened in 2015. I had come out of surgery, and you'll see to the right, me after surgery at the Mayo Clinic in 2015. I was having one of my last surgeries at the Mayo Clinic where they were correcting a J pouch excision. And my recovery in Minnesota kind of looked like this. It was very, very difficult for me to come out of that state. But that whole year, I was struggling with a lot of issues around constipation. Even with an ostomy, even without a colon or a rectum, I was having trouble going to the bathroom. And that's when my eyes started opening that there could be a real problem here because I was feeling obstructed all the time. So at this point in time, my doctors back in New York suggested, hey, Tina, maybe you want to consider a breath test. Your symptoms sound like SIBO. That's when I was diagnosed finally with IBS-C and finally with SIBO. What were my symptoms? Loss of appetite, abdominal pain, nausea, bloating, a lot of fullness after eating, and I couldn't eat that much. And I was gaining this abnormal weight, even though I wasn't eating that much, and it just looked like a lot of bloat. Felt a lot of gas coming up, and this might be TMI, but there was also this sort of rotten egg smell coming from my stools. And that, was all indicative of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, according to my GI doctor. So how did I manage and treat the SIBO? I think this has gone on for a number of years now. Since 2015, 2016, we've been trying various methods to control this. And At times it's worked quite well. More recently, it's not working out so well. So what I did was initially I changed my diet in 2015 and 16, and it helped me to go to the bathroom, and I really didn't have too many problems doing that diet change with a GI dietitian at my IBD center who monitored consistently, me cutting out certain foods and then reintroducing them when I was feeling better. What happened in the last few years, though, is my SIBO started to become more chronic, more refractory, and I went the herbal antibiotic route because I had used so many traditional antibiotics during my Crohn's disease journey and with all the surgeries that I had had. So I was recommended things like Candibactin AR/BR, Biocidin, things like that would help. And I had also cut out a lot of carbs and sugar to try to prevent the SIBO from flaring up. And I cycled on and off these herbal antibiotics for some time and did quite well. I also started to explore things like pelvic floor physical therapy and acupuncture for constipation. The pelvic floor PT helped with a number of other issues. I have pelvic floor dysfunction on top of that, given the inflammatory bowel disease and all the colorectal surgeries I've had. So pelvic floor PT really helped with a number of different things, but has also been key in helping with the constipation and getting things to move. Acupuncture has been instrumental as a complementary alternative therapy. Electroacupuncture specifically has been very helpful in getting things moving when I feel really stuck. During this time, though, I think it became clear, especially in the last 2, 3 years, that there must be some kind of underlying motility disorder for me to have this bad constipation. So I started exploring this in 2018 in New York, wasn't really getting many answers, and finally reached out to my IBD specialist at Mayo Clinic, frustrated, saying, there's something going on with me. The traditional Miralax and other laxatives aren't really cutting it, and I'm having a lot of constipation. He brought me in, he did a whole analysis during this time to understand what was going on with me. I had a gastric emptying study. I had a small bowel manometry done. You can see the photos to the right. And he determined the gastric emptying study was a little bit tricky because what happens is, with an ostomy and without a colon or rectum, there were really no fair values. So it was tricky to do just a gastric emptying study. But with regards to small bowel manometry, they put 15 sensors from my esophagus down into my stomach and small intestine to see the movement that's going on there. And they found antral gastroparesis. So 2 years ago in June 2019, I was diagnosed with that. And that was kind of like, okay, this is what's causing your problems, Tina. But I was still kind of hesitant because I was thinking, that's an upper GI problem. Okay, so I have some nausea. I do have fullness and bloating, but what's going on with my lower GI tract? Um, During this time, I started a lot of meds for off-label medications to treat the chronic constipation, but also to treat the gastroparesis. And things started to move along smoothly. And I just assumed that things were getting better from here on out. About 18 months ago, right before the pandemic, I started having problems again. And I had broken my ankle pretty badly and stopped moving. And as you might know, motility tends to be impacted if you don't exercise or move much. During this time, things got very bad for me. I started to back up consistently. And with the pandemic arriving just a few months after, without much exercise or going many places, my motility was really impacted. Even though I went for walks daily, it didn't matter. Things were starting to get pretty bad again. I was dealing with SIBO the entire spring of 2020, and I was started on a regimen of these herbal antibiotics again, and cycling on and off, and changing them every single time. And I continued sort of the pelvic floor physical therapy and the acupuncture. And I started to get better come last summer and last fall as things were opening up. In New York City, I started to get better. But I found that, after some time, I started to develop refractory SIBO again. It came back in November. Thing is, I was put on prucalopride, I was put on placonidine, domperidone, all these medications to help me go, but nothing was really quite cutting it. During this time, I started seeing a SIBO specialist in New York City who decided she wanted to do an upper endoscopy with a jejunal aspiration. So she did this in March, and I tested positive, heavily positive for SIBO, but also positive for CFO, which is small intestinal fungal overgrowth. Within a few hours of that upper endoscopy, I had a massive bowel obstruction. She had me hold my meds for a couple of days to sort of see what that growth would be like in my bile. And that's how she found the SIBO CFO. So this was considered the gold standard in terms of diagnosis. Because it gave sort of the understanding of what kind of bacteria, what kind of fungus is growing in the gut, rather than a breath test, which just sort of indicates, okay, there is, methane gas or something like that growing. It's not so much indicative, though, of the strains of bacteria or fungus that might be growing. So she really wanted to do this upper endoscopy, and I'm glad she did, although the bowel obstruction really was very difficult to get over, and it took days and days of medications and magnesium citrate to sort of resolve. Over the last couple of months, what's happened in the spring and now into the summer of 2021, I've been treated with rifaximin, I've been treated with diflucan, I've done a low FODMAP diet. You can see some of these photos of different foods that I was trying at home to cook that are lower FODMAP. I've been doing a lot more smoothies and low FODMAP fruits, low FODMAP vegetables. I am vegetarian. I am plant-based for the most part. So trying to work with this with my GI dietitian. I've done 6 weeks of the low FODMAP diet, and I am currently reintroducing foods, but now I'm feeling SIBO flaring again. So this is becoming one of those recurrent problems with me. And just last week, I was diagnosed with another motility problem called chronic intestinal pseudo-obstruction, which I believe is known as SIPO or CIP, CIP. And how did they come to this diagnosis? So between the upper endoscopy and I also underwent an ileoscopy in May of 2021 by my surgeon through my terminal ileum, since I have no colon or rectum. He scoped my small intestine to, of course, look for Crohn's disease, but also to see if there was any mechanical source of obstruction that might be causing my the backups and the constipation and the SIBO. He said, Tina, I can assure you I've gone up 80 centimeters into your small bowel. There is no reason for me to believe that this is a mechanical issue. So once I found that out, we realized, okay, Tina's got a major small bowel transit issue. I am waiting to undergo further testing, but by a process of elimination, I've been diagnosed by 2 Mayo Clinic physicians who have said this sounds and looks very much and presents like chronic intestinal pseudo-obstruction. So where am I right now? Right now, I have started pyridostigmine just in the last few days to see how I do. And I'm waiting to figure out how to deal with the SIBO. I am in the process of taking appointments with Cedars-Sinai to get to the bottom of this issue. As I understand, they have some of the world's best SIBO experts. I'm also awaiting further testing in New York City this summer. I've also been told that I may need some kind of chronic low-dose antibiotic to manage the SIBO, chronically speaking. But I'm not going to lie when I say that this hasn't been taking a toll on me. Emotionally and physically, as we are starting to come out of the pandemic, I'm just wondering how I'm going to manage this. My lifestyle throughout the pandemic and even before that has been every hour or two taking something to help me go. What's tricky and complicated about my case is that I have an ileostomy, I have Crohn's disease, I have all these other functional GI disorders. So trying to parse these out and figure out what's causing what symptom, but also trying to sort of deal with the fact that my ostomy is getting obstructed, the site is getting obstructed without there being any real source of obstruction. That's constantly causing the SIBO to flare up. That's constantly causing the bacteria to ferment because there are these obstructions going on due to the compromised nature of my bowels. So that's kind of where I am today, but I am going to say, just like I've been very persistent with my Crohn's disease, getting it resolved, going to the Mayo Clinic, undergoing the surgeries, joining a clinical trial to get this Crohn's disease better controlled, and I'm fortunate enough to be in remission now, I'm going to figure this out. I realize how heavy of a toll this has taken, but I also realize that I'm very persistent and that I will learn what I need to learn about SIBO and about all these functional GI disorders so that I can manage my care in the best way possible. Thank you so much.